Hey everyone, welcome back to the Chain Reaction Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Shaughnessy, a co-founder at Delphi Digital, where we're 5 full-time analysts focused on institutional crypto research. If you aren't a subscriber, you're missing out, so visit the site while you're listening. One quick housekeeping item. This podcast is strictly informational and educational and is not investment advice or solicitation to buy or sell any tokens or securities or to make any financial decisions. I may personally own tokens that are mentioned on the podcast, and you can view the show notes for our full disclosures. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm thrilled to have on an interesting company. I have Jack O'Halloran, the SKALE Labs co-founder and CEO. How's it going, Jack?
Hey, Tom. Good. Very nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, Jack, let's jump right into it. How did you get started in crypto?
Yeah, so I was in Silicon Valley for doing startups for about 13 years. And my first startup, coincidentally, was a cryptography-oriented startup. It was called Good Technology. We used cryptographic secure messaging. The majority of the Fortune 500 and the White House and U.S. Senate, FBI, all used Good. And that was my first introduction into security. And I like to joke that we had this phenomenal cryptography certification, this FIPS 140-2 certification that I joke that it was so good because actually Stan, my co-founder now of SKALE Labs, did the crypto cert back in, I think, 2003. So that was my first introduction to crypto. And then I started actually a digital currency platform in 2008. And you could actually tokenize assets inside of enterprises. So NASA, for example, had these NASA bucks, and they could tokenize a wind tunnel or supercomputer, and it was a great learning lesson in the power of incentives and digital currencies, and how they can help shape resource allocation and make systems work more effectively and efficiently. But the timing was not great. However, the market crashed there in 2008 soon after, but was able to build, go with that team and build really what became the world's leading AI and machine learning platform in the life science industry. So it was a SaaS platform, and most of the pharmaceutical and biotech reps around the world are guided by this platform. It's called Octana, and in the US, Japan, China, Europe, and all over the world. So built that company up over many years, and the entire time though got really interested in crypto. Even the second I saw the Bitcoin white paper in 2011, but didn't really get engaged till I was in China on a business trip in 2013. And a good friend kept saying, "You need to go buy Bitcoin." And I when I wasn't smart enough to really dig in and start mining, but really got involved and got involved in the industry more as an investor and enthusiast. And then when Ethereum launched, then I was kind of really dead set on starting my next company in this space because I was really enamored with the opportunities for business model innovation and just disruption, where we have middlemen and incumbents that are taking unfair positions, and there's a lot of cool things that you can do with decentralization technology. So that was my path getting into the space, and in 2017. Was really spending 100% of my time working on my next startup, and that's when I was introduced to Stan. So Signia Ventures and Floodgate Ventures introduced us, and Stan and I then put our heads together. And I'll stop, but I could tell you how we came across what we're working on now. But that's how I got involved with crypto.
Wow, no, that's an excellent story. Clearly passionate about it, and you have the business expertise, which is awesome. And I know we were chatting earlier on, what SKALE is and the quick takeaway. And I know there's a lot of different tech in the space between sidechains and plasma and payment channels. But if you had to give the quick overview before totally diving in, what's the elevator pitch on SKALE?
Yeah, so we are really building a decentralized cloud. So when you look at the SKALE architecture, what it is an elastic blockchain network. We're able to you as a developer are able to leverage cutting edge microservices and containerization and cutting edge cryptography and essentially deploy a blockchain for your use. So in today's world, let's say I'm building a game, I can go and leverage cutting edge microservices and containerization to deploy a back end for myself. I can deploy something on Amazon and I have my own database. And it's very easy to do that. I'm able to leverage the cloud to pull in the resources I need, and it's mine. And if somebody else has a game and they're really successful, it doesn't impede my progress or make my system cost more or slow it down. I just have my own back end. And the Scale network actually does that for developers in a decentralized fashion. And one of the main use cases, however, is using a side chain on the Ethereum network. So and so we like to call those elastic side chains because there's different security models than normal side chains and different models to guarantee uptimes and performance and security. So that's the high level and the big vision in terms of an elastic blockchain network, and a very focused vision in how people today, the 20 plus dApps that are in the Scale Innovator program, are using Scale.
Wow, that's excellent to see that there's already traction. We'll get into that. But stepping back, a lot of emphasis is placed on payment channels and state channels, I guess because of Lightning success and all the teams building on Ethereum there. But there's also, side chains and plasma side chains. What you're saying is that Scale isn't either of these, right? It's a totally different architecture.
Yeah, so it's different in the sense. Scale is very unique. So the security for the Scale network foundationally is actually rooted into the Ethereum mainnet. So the Scale smart contracts that manage resourcing and node allocation, and also rewards given to validators through staking and inflation and fees, all of those that lives actually in the Ethereum mainnet. And the fee model or the stake model. So when I'm running a validator node and I stake into the system, that actually gets staked into the Ethereum mainnet as well. And so we actually are able to leverage security from the mainnet for the foundational component for the Scale network. Now, the custody and the chains actually live over in the Scale network, and it's a Byzantine fault tolerant network. But typically, side chains can be very susceptible easily to a Byzantine attack. That would mean when 2/3 of the nodes go rogue and decide to do a double spend. If you only have, let's say, 15 or 30 nodes, it's much easier to get 2/3 of them to be bad than if you had 8,000 nodes like in the Ethereum network. So the way Scale works around this is we have this broad pool of nodes, and we're going to start with 500 nodes as the goal. And over time, we'd like that to be 5,000 or 50,000 nodes. And what happens is, as a developer, when you deploy your chain, instead of just saying, hey, these 16 work for me, for example, let's say I have 16 nodes in my side chain, it actually pools all the available nodes in the system. So it may be looking at thousands and thousands of nodes, and we have a very secure way of drawing randomness to determine what nodes then work for you. And then those nodes are shuffled frequently, and they're rotated. And so what it does is it gives you these security guarantees for against Byzantine fault tolerance, against collusion of 2/3 of nodes, not just against 16 working for you, but against a broader pool, because it's pulling from randomness and it's shuffling with randomness. And therefore, to probabilistically have 2/3 of those go bad, you need to have really 2/3 of a bigger network. And there's also a staking component and incentive component, so that it really motivates validators to not steal from the network, but to be good actors. So that's just the high level. There's other differences, but the Scale network itself is unique, and that's why. And it's also can be, because of the containers in the network, you can deploy a small chain, a medium chain, a large chain, and you can even grow it or make it smaller based off your needs. So there are definitely many differences, and that's why we like to call them elastic side chains rather than just a traditional kind of static side chain.
No, that's a super interesting overview. And I guess just digging in a little bit on what this all has the potential to drive, I mean, what's the sell to developers? Like, are the developers building on Scale saying, hey, Jack, we can't achieve scale through the layer 2 solutions we have. and sharding and all of these other tech is too far away and we want to deploy a highly scalable app and you guys can do that today? Or is the sell really just to get apps that aren't built on the cloud where it's a more Web3 focus? I'm just trying to key in on like the ultra selling point to a decentralized app developer.
Yeah, great question. So today, the main value proposition is you have an Ethereum let's say you have an Ethereum decentralized application. So let's say you've got a game that's been running on Ethereum, which half of our innovator programmed dApps are games that are built on Ethereum. And you need greater throughput, you need more smart contracts executed. So on Scale, you can execute your smart contracts in sub-second times. And so if you think about what that enables from a game, I could have, instead of just one smart contract and I jam everything I can into it, I could be leveraging numerous smart contracts. I can change the gameplay design. I can have transactions going through here. And the beauty here of the sidechain model and Elastic sidechain model is my end users are not encumbered by needing to manage another just supply of money. They don't need to keep a balance to against, as you would in a state channel environment. You don't need to guess and hope that your balance works for that game or what that developer is doing. You unlike Plasma instances, you don't need to for your end users worry about them having these timeouts where they can't pull their money out over a certain period, or challenge periods where hey, I've got my money into this game, and if I'm not watching the game and someone's challenging me trying to take my money, I could lose my money. Really, the security lies in the hands of the validators, and that's why it's critical to have the incentive structure the right way. But what is brought to developers is, hey, take what you have on Ethereum, 2 lines of code deploy, and then no changes for your end user. Your end user doesn't need to know to even use a system. They don't have to manage the other balance. They don't have user experience issues. So that's number one. Number two, in the long run, we're going to see, I think, people bringing things from Web 2 into Web 3. And all of those, you could run a game, a website, decentralized Uber, a search engine, all in Scale. And use instead of needing to go elsewhere for storage, like the whole thing can live in the Scale network. So it's pretty broad, and I thank you for asking that, because it is nice to be able to just call out the fact that it solves the problems of today, but also doesn't need a change for the future as these systems grow and to cater to decentralized needs.
No, that's excellent. And I guess the second question along that line of thinking is, do the teams that come to Scale test other solutions like Plasma? Plasma's not really launched yet, but like other layer 2 scaling solutions on Ethereum before they come to Scale? Or do you think that this market for layer 2 solutions will centralize around, 1 or 2 key providers here? And I hate to say centralize. I'm just wondering, because there's dozens of teams working to build out layer 2, and it seems like you guys are pretty far along.
Yeah, so it's a mix. So we have people that do research. One of the great things about marketing to developers is it's not marketing. It's really this is a smart audience. They do their homework. They dig into tech, and we have people that go and read and they research and they get into code. They get into white papers. They get into technical content, and then they reach out to us and say, "Hey, we like the platform. We want to try it." And so we just have a lot of people that do their own homework and then come to us. Then we have other people that used other platforms and frankly had really bad experiences, and then are looking for better solutions. And I won't name names. I think I think there's a lot of really great solutions out there, but we've had a lot of just inbound interest because the problem's not being solved yet.
No, that's helpful. And are you guys live today for those teams that you mentioned, or like where are you guys on your roadmap today?
Yeah, so there'll be a big announcement on this soon, which maybe before or after this podcast is launched, but probably somewhere close to the date of this. But the Scale Fuji DevNet has been launched. So that means instead of Scale launched the first testnet last year in December, and then we launched a DevNet in February at ETH Denver. We've had over 22 submissions at the ETH hackathons, and a number of these, there are more submissions on Scale than any other platform or offering in the hackathon. So it's very, very broadly used at the hackathons. And but now what's happened is we've gone from the DevNet to, which was our Mount Tam. For those of you familiar with the Bay Area, it's a very small mountain, if you want to even call it a mountain. And then we've just launched Fuji. And so instead of Scale running those nodes, we have really amazing validators, top validators in the ecosystem running Scale nodes. And so they are now being run externally, globally, in a decentralized fashion. And so all of these developers using Scale today are using it in this DevNet environment and preparing for network launch, which is targeted for the end of this year, where then they will launch in a live environment. And so we're getting a lot of pressure for us from these dApps to move quickly so that they can bring, all of a sudden go to this gasless model, which I can describe too, because it really changes not just the way smart contracts are used, but the way things are priced back to their users. So we're trying to move fast so we can go from DevNet, from Fuji to Kilimanjaro, which launches later this year.
That's awesome. And yeah, I definitely want to learn more about that gasless model. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so one, I think, really tough thing about the pricing model with, I guess, decentralized systems thus far is you actually penalize users for using your product in the sense they have to pay every time they use it. And usually those models that you see, that doesn't happen in SaaS, unless we're talking about API calls. It's usually hey, get something, use it as much as you want within these broader constraints, and then when you start using it more, we'll upgrade you. And so the good thing about gas, though, is it prevents DDoSing. And so what Scale does, Scale actually has kind of an invisible gas behind the scenes that the users use really unknowingly. And if they start hitting the system frequently, that gas gets spent, and it then will prevent a DDoS. But it's actually not a real payment. The way the payment works is the developer will buy a Scale chain, and they'll buy a small chain or a medium chain or a large chain, and they'll buy it over a period of time, like 12 months or 24 months. And then they can use that chain as much as they want. And a small chain, you'll get about 20 transactions per second, and a large chain, you'll get about 2,000 per second. And you also can use it for storage. And if you start using more than what you've bought, you just basically get throttled down because you just have a certain amount of computation allotted to you and working at your disposal. So you're not paying, you're paying for just like you would for AWS, and then you don't penalize your users for using it. They pay gas fees through Ethereum every time they need to pull money in or out, because Scale would then need to ping the Ethereum network to essentially rectify the ledger. And unlock the Ether or DAI or ERC 721 or ERC 20. But that's really how this gasless model works. And people are pretty excited about it.
No, that's awesome. It abstracts away an annoying part of the network, especially from a UX perspective. And you just mentioned that, purchasing a small or large chain and you could do compute and storage. It's probably like a naive question, but where do the validators on your network provision their own storage? Are these people building out their own server farms, or are they kind of provisioning this on AWS? Where does all of that stuff happen?
Yeah, it's, what the network does. So every node monitors randomly 24 other nodes, and it produces an SLA score. And what it looks for are performance requirements in terms of uptime, in terms of speed and latency, and in terms of storage capacity. And so people then can kind of skin the cat however they want. And a lot of them are using VPS, and then in conjunction with, we're going to have an SGX for security and signing for BLS keys component. Or they could be running on bare metal or in a co-location center. So it depends on their infrastructure and how they are set up. And the network just cares about the performance at the end of the day. And then validators are going to be able to create competitive platforms based off of, their own OpEx and security. So it'll be really cool to see how that comes together.
Yeah, it's the first time I'm hearing about SLAs in crypto. So
right, it's kind of again, pulling something that works from the enterprise world and from cloud computing and enterprise, and and creating a way to, in a decentralized, autonomous fashion, have these nodes monitor each other to maintain the system.
No, that's huge. People forget like large institutions and enterprises are used to dealing with 5 nines reliability in data centers. They don't want to deal with something that may not have uptime or may not be redundant, along those lines.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're trying to bring this enterprise grade quality to bear in this market in a way that is done in a fully decentralized, autonomous fashion. That's kind of one of our early goals when Stan and I got together and started working on this, and we thought about like, what are we trying to build? Who are we? What can we bring, and what value can we add to the Ethereum community?
That's huge. And so at the end of the day, I can run my own validator on Scale however way I want. I could provision this in the cloud, or I can build out my own infrastructure as long as it meets the requirements that are good enough for the network.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's huge. And just getting into Scale itself, like how does it differ, I guess, at like the high technical perspective here? Like, I think a problem with other side chains is that validators are only as secure as like their validators and their consensus. And that's like a weakness for a lot of side chains. I guess, how do you guys prevent that weakness? How do you prevent collusion? Are there anything you guys are doing there to help bolster, I guess, the security there?
Yeah, really great question. So one, let me be explicitly clear. There's still custody, right? If 2/3 of the node in your Elastic sidechain go Byzantine, that money will be lost. Okay, and so it's really critical to make sure you seed the network with great validators, and also for us, it's really critical to make sure we always have a certain amount of capacity in our network that allows for randomness in terms of new chain generation and shuffling. So for us, let's say if I just said, hey, I just spun up 16 nodes, they work for you, and these are the 16 nodes, then it's pretty easy to collude. But if there's 10,000 nodes and each one has staked $20,000 into the network, they'd lose if they double signed. And then I'm going to, in a very secure manner using BLS threshold signatures and DKG, select those validators that work for you and say, I've guaranteed the randomness and they've staked money now. And guess what? We already know that, Scale has already sold $15 million worth of tokens to top validators and investors and delegators around the world. And so the network's seeded already with really solid 2/3. And it makes it very expensive to own 2/3 of the network to do an attack on one chain. And in many cases, it's better to just buy the assets. So we try to defend against that by making it really tough to collude and really expensive to collude. And then on top of that, I just think we're going to see use cases evolve over time, just like they did on Ethereum. People were very careful about how much money and the volume of the size of transactions a long time ago on Ethereum. And over time, and especially after the hack and after the security fixes, we're seeing a lot of trust in the Ethereum network. And I think you're going to see the same thing happen, not just with Scale, but all of these BFT networks. And I think we're going to see people crawl, walk, and run with them. And the biggest risk, I will tell you, is not, and this is the same with a state channel or a Plasma implementation, is not, it's in a bug in the system. It's something that was overlooked. And so that's why we are being very vigilant about security. And we're going to have a lot of programs and structures to try to incentivize people to find those issues. But that's the main risk. And that's true with anything, even if it has fraud proofs that prevent any attacks and you're not relying on validators. So that's the big risk here, I think.
No, it's great that you're candid about the risk because it's helpful for people looking at you guys. And, just to zoom out, so it sounds like you guys are trying to bolster security from our own research, we have a layer 2 post out, my partner Medio and myself did, but our 2 takeaways were that you guys help bolster security by having each validator validate multiple sidechains at a time, not just one. And you're also shuffling the validators to prevent collusion. help disincentivize bad actors. Is that kind of like the two main takeaways from what you just said on bolstering security?
And just that that there's a big pool. So let's say there's 1,000 validators, I, they're going to be, we'll be able to pull, and of those validators, they actually are split into 28 chunks, where each node is actually made up of 128 virtualized subnodes. And so I could be getting, again, like you said, one validator might be on 128 different blockchains. So I have this big pool of resources, and if there's 1,000 nodes in the network, that means there's a big group that then are randomly selected to work for me. If there's just 20 and I'm using 10, well, it's way easier to try to get collusion happening. If there's 20,000 and I'm getting 10, it's much tougher for rogue or bad actors to try to get a 2/3 majority on that chain.
Makes a lot of sense. And looking at Scale and your raise, you said earlier that you guys raised money to help, seed a great community. How do you guys incentivize a network or a global network of validators to take part in the network?
Yeah, really great question. So the validators, a lot of people ask me, I get questions from friends, hey, what token should I buy? What should I be following? And I say, look at the top validators' websites. They are doing all the homework. They don't have to just put money on the line, but they also put time, effort, resources. So, we're thankful to have a lot of great validators like Bison Trails and Stake with Us and NGC and Hashed and Chorus One and others, all planning on working right now with Scale in our Fuji DevNet. So they do the homework, and it's very competitive to get them to work in your platform. But they're very technical, and they're plugged in with investors, and they're plugged in to the developer community. So we're fortunate, and really, I more like to say the validators really are going to be the owners of the network from the perspective that they are the supply side. Their customers are the dApps in these types of systems, and the developers that buy the resource. And so we really see ourselves as being, needing to support them and building something for them. And so it's really nice to see, them engaging and partnering. And I think they really understand that too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, once you're looking at the main people and where they're providing infrastructure to, that's a really good way to think about it. Jack, just switching over a little bit to kind of your high level view on, dApps and Web3 and where everything's going. I mean, if we start with Ethereum's roadmap, like, does Ethereum have to scale to be successful? Because it sounds like you guys can handle the scaling, and you really don't need Ethereum 2.0 to achieve your vision, or is that maybe too naive?
No, I mean, I think it'll be really interesting to see the way it unfolds. And by the way, so it will be, I think, regardless if ETH2.0 launches or not, Scale or systems, elastic blockchain networks like Scale will play a strong role in providing developers backends so they can give experiences to their users that are designed and configured the way they want it to be. I think people are going to want to have their own backend of a blockchain or decentralized cloud like they do in the centralized world with traditional clouds. When it comes to scaling and throughput and cost issues, a lot of them will be appeased by the successes of elastic sidechains and plasma solutions and state channel solutions that, for different types of use cases have different strengths and weaknesses. I think we're going to see a lot of success across the board. And I just think, ETH2.0, if it's still just as secure and complemented by these other systems, then great. I think there'll just be less pain when they finally launch. And it'll be interesting to see the way the Ethereum Foundation and the leaders of the roadmap within the Ethereum core team determine how they should allocate their resources based off what people need. So So we all have a front row seat here, I guess. Those of us closely watching, it'll be fun to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, for sure. And a common pushback to Ethereum is that it can't scale and it can't support the real use cases that are live. And people bring up examples like, if Web3 was a thing, why are people okay with their privacy getting hacked on Facebook and Equifax? And I generally push back saying, there isn't like a great dApp to move all those users to yet, but the space is working on scalability. How would you push back to the FUD or the misunderstanding that Ethereum can't scale? Because it seems like you guys are right in the midst here, and it doesn't really hold up in this conversation.
Yeah, I think I think it hasn't been able to, because a lot of these great projects haven't launched in the wild yet, right? And so Scale is one of them. And I also just want to say, by the way, when you look at the Scale architecture and we look at everything happening with Plasma, when we see a Plasma implementation that can add value, that just becomes a configuration option in Scale. And you could even run a state channel with a Scale chain. So these things are building blocks as opposed to being, Scale is really an architecture that can complement Ethereum very, very well, and can leverage Plasma or state channels too. I didn't make that clear earlier. I want to make that clear now, for use cases where that could be optimal, where the user experience has a fit. But hey, I'm talking to people every day that are building on Ethereum, and what's happening in test environments is we have scalability. We have smart contracts that are finalizing in less than a second. Block times are happening at sub-second times. And it's all happening within the Ethereum ecosystem. And the onboarding experience for users is getting so much better. All the progress we're seeing from like all the different wallet solutions and onboarding solutions and Web3 solutions and Bitski and Portis and Fortmatic and all of these other tools that just make life easier for the user to get crypto into these tools and into these applications and use them. There's so much happening all within the Ethereum ecosystem. So, and that's where the developers are. That's where infrastructure is being built. That's where games and DeFi is being built. I'm seeing it every day. And so I think the naysayers are going to see reality hit them in the face, probably the beginning of 2020, as these products get to market and actually start disrupting as they're planned.
That makes a lot of sense. And just one technical question there. I mean, I was looking at Polkadot a few weeks ago, and one of the better things was that parachains it's easy for them to communicate. It seems like on Scale that it's easy for your sidechains or your Elastic sidechains to communicate with each other. And I guess that could have a lot of benefits if you want Scale or if you want to combine applications built or infrastructure built on different Elastic sidechains. Is that a goal for you guys? Are you seeing that, or is that maybe too early? Or just wrong?
No. I mean, that's a really core piece of that's absolutely critical to our platform. So you need to be able to, in a very light, lean, cost-effective way, be able to communicate back between Scale chains and between a Scale chain to a mainnet like Ethereum. And we can do that today in less than a second. And you can we use BLS threshold signatures. The code is up on GitHub for anybody that wants to see it. And we also are going to be releasing interchain messaging code. A lot of that's been in deep research and will be open very soon. And it was one of the toughest and most challenging things that we had to overcome in building this network, is having secure, reliable, fast, performant interchain messaging. And we, as of like a few weeks ago, just finished that.
That's huge. And when you think about the layer 2 market, and I hate to say this, but what do you think will be the driving force to drive developers to Scale versus, payment channels, state channels, side chains, et cetera? Like, my worst case take is, God forbid there's a massive hack or collusion on one of these other problems, or, data availability on state channels is a concern. But what do you think are the main drivers for you guys? Is it just that raw, hey, we can scale, we're legit, and we kind of handle security in a different way?
You know what? I think a lot of it's going to come down to use cases. So let's say I have an Ethereum application or centralized application where I have a certain set of people that always like to send money back and forth to each other. without any complex logic. Well, and they want to do it a lot, and they want to do it between the same people, and they want it to happen frequently, and they're fine with subsidizing or having like a balance that exceeds what's being used at any given time. Well, great. State channels are great for that. And Plasma has its own set of advantages, again, where there's not complex logic and smart hard requirements for smart contract execution, and really you don't have whatever the issues are with mass exits and challenges, periods, and such. But with Scale, when people want to run applications and they want to run smart contracts as part of an application, whether it be a game or a decentralized finance application, where you need to incorporate logic and computation into the fold in terms of what happens with the money, and you just want to use 2 lines of code to deploy and not have your end users ever know what happened, then Elastic sidechains are a really great fit. And that's where it's just, and what you're giving up is you need to trust another Byzantine fault tolerant network. And I remember, back when Bitcoin was the only game in town, people said, we can't trust another network. This is ridiculous. We can't trust Ethereum. And, a lot of people pushed, and next thing you know, we all trust Ethereum. Now, I don't think you can trust an unlimited number of chains, but I think there are going to be a lot of blockchains and there are going to be a lot of networks. And I think we can only trust 1 or 2 chains for security, because they all rely on humans being good actors and having the right incentive structures. I think that view won't age well. And it's going to be something that, the people that have loud voices now are going to be pretty quiet on it in a few years. And, and hey, I also will say there'll be issues, things are going to break, and we need to move slowly with precision, and we need to make sure we're not selling mortgages on a side chain anytime soon. But there's a lot of really great use cases where these things will be leveraged, and we'll see a lot of good successes quickly.
That's excellent color. And Jack, how do you think about network effects for layer 2? Because I know it's a hotly debated issue on layer 1, but on layer 2, it seems like the winning scaling method will eat the world, or winner takes most here, because developers will trust it. They'll tell their friends. There'll be other infrastructure and other side chains to use. There'll be more liquidity. There'll be more security. Like, do you think that, as good as Plasma may be in the future, or state or payment channels, do you think there's really only going to be 1 or 2 winners built on Ethereum for scale? Or do you really think that we'll have, dozens?
No, I think we're going to have just a few winners, to be honest. But I think in terms of, I really think it will be like any field. I think you're going to see consolidation and winning around areas where it plays to strengths. And I think there'll be again, different methods are really viable for different use cases. However, I think that and so one advantage, and you think of network effects with Elastic sidechains, is the more nodes in the network and the more people that use it, the more secure it gets, because it's costs more to do a 2/3 attack across the entire network, which means it costs more to attack an individual chain. So if I'm a developer and there's a network that's got 1,000 nodes and there's one that has 10, then I obviously want to go to the one where there's more nodes, because there's greater security, assuming the randomness works and the incentive structures are all in place and the code is strong. And so there's natural network effects for developers, because they get value when they go to the bigger network that's more secure. And then from a validator perspective, I think they're going to go to where, it's, if you're an Uber driver, you don't go with a competitor to Uber or Lyft because there's no riders. So go to where the developers are, and that's where the business is. And then eventually that's where the token appreciation happens, and where the speculation and investment effort goes to where we actually see real business metrics. So I do think we're going to see people consolidate because of performance and security. I think when we think, though, of Plasma and state channels, we really need to think of them as building blocks. And Scale, for example, could launch a configuration option to run a state channel, or to run a Plasma operator within your scale chain. And as soon as we see that being a requirement, we'll just add that as a configuration option. And it's all open source code. And really what we're trying to provide is a network that validators can come and run healthy, strong businesses and support developers, and also support people that want to delegate their tokens and earn interest on them. And we're trying to, that's our goal.
Jack, that's huge. And it makes a lot of sense. And my last question for you, Jack, it seems like the composability and interop between projects, and we're focused on building out the infrastructure now, so it's hard to point to winning use cases. But I continue to tell people and be a believer that if we build all the infrastructure and we can mix and match it, we'll have a petri dish of experimentation that'll drive new apps. I guess the question for you is, are you seeing projects come to you that are focused on one area? Like, is it gaming? Is it business services? And the other question is, has this changed from the inbound you guys got when you first started?
Yeah, really good question. So we're we're seeing about 50% gaming on the Ethereum network. So I think it's a fallacy to think gaming's not going to be viable on Ethereum. There's just such great tooling for developers and an ecosystem of at their disposal. So and just frankly, people that have Ether. So it's just if you want to integrate that as a payment vehicle or currency into your game, and or launch an ERC20 token or 721 token, it's a really secure way to do it. So that's huge. It's a huge category. Then DeFi is a growing thing that is very broad. I think DeFi will be a term that I think might outgrow itself pretty soon, because it's so broad. And then we're also seeing about 25% DeFi, and then about 25% just across the map, where you have people that are disrupting the advertising space, people who are disrupting enterprise software, people who are disrupting music industry, people who are disrupting gaming and betting in different categories. So it's really interesting. And where I think the most success will happen, it's who are the middlemen that are taking the most value from their users, that someone could design systems to disrupt those areas, or what centralized companies can incorporate decentralized structures where they can have better profit sharing and transparency and visibility and performance, and disrupt their competitors who are larger incumbents who are taking more than their fair share. So there's a ton of room, right? As soon as we have less friction for users. Right now, like, these things won't get off the ground if the user experience sucks. It just won't happen. But once the UX gets better, with both the front, the onboarding for users and the scaling component, this stuff's going to take off because the value prop's so strong.
That's excellent, caller. And Jack, one last one for you I just thought of. You said earlier that it only takes 2 lines of code to work with your platform. I guess, what's the runner-up, or what's your layer 2 competitor? Like, how long does it take for a developer to deploy layer 2 on some other project? Because it seems like 2 lines of code is a really quick turnaround time.
Yeah, so it's that is another just really, really great advantage. So when we think of scalability as an equal part user experience issue as it is a technology issue, and that's user experience for the end user using the dApp. And again, if the friction is higher than the reward, people don't use the system. They don't play. They don't come back. And the other piece is for developers. Developers need to have good user experience. Look at Twilio. Look at people who have won in the developer space. They need to bring easy to use systems. And for Scale, it's just as easy as deploying a Rinkeby testnet or any of the testnets. You just update the IP address and the port, and there you go. You're pointing to your Scale chain. And then it's a little more involved if you want to do interchain messaging and have money transfer between DAI or ERC 721, et cetera. But still, the code samples are all there. And I won't get into any specific competitors, but a lot of the feedback we hear is that it's far more cumbersome and difficult, and there's also a lot of assumptions around architecture and such. And we just want to make it easy for people building on Ethereum to take that and move it over and not have to think about it. And we have a lot of hard work to do to make sure this is secure and that we build a really great validator community. But if those things come together, I think we're excited to see what people will build and what value this brings to the broader Ethereum community.
That's awesome. Jack, thanks so much for your time. It's awesome that you were able to not only dive into the tech, but really link it in a good way to devs and a broader audience. So I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Tom. And keep putting out the great research. Really love what you and your team are doing for the industry. And really a pleasure talking to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jack.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for listening to the episode. If you can go to iTunes and hit subscribe to the Chain Reaction podcast, it'll go a long way in helping us reach new listeners and help support the show. Thanks again.